Okay, so I want to now show you how to do a kick pleat in the back of a skirt. Hopefully you can see this is the vent that we did. So it just folds back. It provides a little slit in the skirt. So now I'm going to take this, and this is what's considered a kick pleat. So there's actually pleats in the fabric. So this one has one, two, this one has two full pleats in it. So this is the back of this skirt. So now here's the pattern once it's all completed. So I'm just gonna, you can see down here, this is where the actual pleats are formed that go, let's see if I can get it to full. So they're gonna go in here. So this would be the wrong side of this pattern. So to get to this, I've traced out my my skirt sloper, the back again. So what I want to decide is how many pleats I want to have. I want to decide how far up I want it to be. So again, I'm going to take this and I'm going to mark up 6 inches. Actually, I'm going to use my pink marker here. So I've got this marked up 6 inches from the bottom. And generally, a pleat is anywhere from 1 inch to 2 inches in depth. So by depth, that is how far between each fold we have. So you can see here, I've got 1.5 inches. So I'm going to measure out in order to get two pleats. So this is one, and then this one behind forms the second one. I need to have an extension that has 4 times the width of each pleat. So I've made these pleats 1.5 inches deep. So I'm going to draw out 1.5 inches. Actually, what I'm going to do makes it maybe just a little bit easier to work from to start with is I'm going to draw out my line extending from that 6-inch mark and extending across the hip. So I've got my first pleat, half of the pleat at 1.5. I'm going to line this up along the line there. I'm going to draw another line. So there's another 1.5. I'm going to draw a third one, and I'm going to make a fourth one. So this pleat is going to go pleating this way. And remember again, no seam allowances are on this skirt pattern. So you can see here where I've got my 4 pleats. So I'm going to want to draw my seam allowance on here. Now I did draw it because the back, these are going to be cut 2 separate pieces. So I will have to have a seam allowance along the outside edge of this last pleat. So I'm just going to draw that in black just so I know that it's not part of the pleat. So then I'm going to take and do a seam allowance all the way around my skirt. So I've got it down the back. Now, depending upon whether you want this the full 6, you're going to do a seam allowance. It's going to come up here. So that keeps this opening here. So this, when I sew my back seam up, I'm going to stop right here. This is going to be from here to the hem is going to be open. Okay, so I'm going to trace my seam allowance all the way around my waistline. Like I say, make sure when you are doing this that you are taking the time, you're being accurate. Make sure that you get all of your 5/8 of an inch seams done accurately, not too quickly like I'm doing, eyeballing it a little bit here. 2. Okay, so I'm not going to bother adding a seam allowance. If this was a skirt that I'm actually doing, I would definitely be putting a seam or a hem allowance on here. For the sake of my demonstration today, I'm not going to add a hem allowance, but there again, standard hem allowance on a straight skirt is 1.5 inches. Okay, so I've got this all done. So now I'm going to take and I'm going to cut this out. I'm going to cut along this edge here. I'm going to cut along my seam allowance here. You could take your notcher and you could put a notch in the center back there so you know you have to stitch and line those two up. Another thing you may want to do, I've traced out these lines with tracing paper, but there again, you may want to take and notch all of these lines that have to get folded. That actually doesn't get folded. So there again, I'm going to bring this line right up into my seam allowance if I'm going to notch it. So I'm going to cut, I'm going to take my notcher, I'm going to notch there. I'm going to take my awl because I want to make sure that I have a hole here so that I make sure that I mark this as the stopping point for my back seam. You want to also make sure that you're cutting accurately. If you add or subtract even as much as 1/16 of an inch on every seam allowance, you're going to end up making your garment that much bigger. True up your darts before you do anything. So I'm going to cut all the way around. Right down to the hem. Okay, so now I have my pleat. So I would be sewing my backs together, center back seam together, which is this seam here. I'm going to draw all my marks now. For this one, I'm going to fold this as if this is the right side of the skirt. So I'm going to fold along this line. I'm going to fold along the next line. So I've got it folded. So there I've created one pleat. Now I'm going to fold again. And I'm going to fold it for the last time. This little extension here is a seam allowance, so that will get sewn up and that will actually be back. So now you can see where you have this little accordion of 2 pleats in the back of your kick pleat. Okay, so that is adding a kick pleat to the back of your skirt.